Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take complex topics, crack open your sources, and really pull out those essential nuggets of knowledge for you. Today, we're diving into something pretty fascinating, something that touches almost every society. The sociology of religion. Think about it for a second. How can something so personal, like faith, which varies so much across cultures, become this undeniable public force, sometimes unifying, sometimes not so much? That's really the core question we want to dig into today. We're going to peel back the layers, try to understand how sociologists actually define religion. What does it do for people, for societies? And how does it work in, private life versus the public square? We'll be drawing on academic sources, including Kristen Smith's work and key texts on world religions. The goal is to give you a clear, grounded view of religion as a powerful social institution. Think of it less as debating beliefs and more like understanding the social mechanics, the social technology, if you will.
Exactly. From a sociological perspective, we look at religion as a social institution. It shapes society, and of course, society shapes it right back. We're not here to argue about whose beliefs are true. Instead, we respect all the diverse systems out there. But we look for common sociological ground. We'll explore concepts like the sacred and the profane, different kinds of religious groups, and what we call the causal powers of religion. Things like how it shapes identity, provides meaning, and how it exerts social control sometimes.
Okay, let's start right there, the definition. When we talk about religion in sociology, what are we really getting at? How's it different from, say, how you might define your own personal faith?
That's a really crucial distinction to make right off the bat. Kristen Smith, who's a major figure in this field, offers a definition that kind of shifts the focus. He argues religion is best understood as a complex of culturally prescribed practices that are based on premises about the existence and nature of superhuman powers.
Okay, superhuman powers. Let's unpack that term a bit. What does he mean by that exactly? Is it just like supernatural beings?
Well, Smith is quite specific here. Superhuman means powers that can do things humans just can't. And importantly, their existence doesn't depend on us, on human actions. It's a bit broader, maybe, than just saying supernatural or focusing only on the sacred. Those terms can sometimes be tricky for analysis because they might not fit every spiritual tradition quite right.
So it's less about some abstract sacredness and more about acknowledging powers beyond human capability.
In a way, yes. And the crucial part of his definition is the emphasis on practices.
Right. You mentioned that. So it's not just about what's going on inside your head, your beliefs, but what your community's traditions actually tell you to do. That feels like a big shift.
It really is. The core here is what religious people do. The rituals, the observances, the specific behaviors. Now, beliefs are always there, embedded in the practices. You wouldn't do the practice without the belief, usually. But the sociological lens focuses first on those observable, culturally meaningful actions, the things repeated over time.
Okay, practices, driven by beliefs about superhuman powers.
And why do people do them? Smith argues it's about trying to achieve human goods and avoid bads. That could be anything from hoping to avoid misfortune, getting blessings, finding help in a crisis. It's very practical, often.
So it's an active engagement, not just passive belief.
Precisely. And sociologically, we're looking at the public, the institutionalized meanings behind these practices, not just what one individual hopes to get out of it. This helps us see how religion functions in the wider social structure. And this is also where concepts like the sacred and profane often come into play. Religious practices frequently draw a line, don't they, between what's set apart, holy, revered, the sacred, and the ordinary, everyday world, the profane.
That makes sense. The doing of religion carves out that sacred space or time.
Okay, so if a religion is fundamentally about these prescribed practices connecting with superhuman powers, what does that create in society? What are the social, cultural features or powers that bubble up from this activity? Right. So when people practice religion together, they generate these causal capacities. These are new social features, new kinds of power, really, that influence people's lives and the world around them. It's important to note these are kind of secondary aspects. They emerge from religious practice. They aren't the core definition itself, but they're incredibly impactful.
Okay, like what kind of capacities?
Well, one of the most obvious is identity and community. Religion is just a massively powerful source for understanding who you are, where you belong. It creates solidarity, brings people together. It shapes how they see themselves and their place.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about Mormonism. It provides a very strong, distinct identity. And it fosters pretty strict self-regulation and community control through its structures, like the geographically based wards or the annual meetings members have with their bishops.
Okay.
Or in Islam, you have the concept of the ummah, this idea of a global religious community built on shared scripture, shared practices. It transcends national borders. That's a powerful form of identity.
Yeah, I can see that. It makes you think, if you look at, say, student groups on a college campus, a religious group might offer a really unique kind of identity, maybe a deeper sense of community compared to, I don't know, a chess club or something.
It often does. It can integrate more aspects of life, offer a more comprehensive sense of belonging and purpose, which leads to another key capacity, meaning-making. Religion provides these big frameworks for understanding reality itself. It helps solve what sociologists sometimes call the axiological meta problem. That's a fancy way of saying it helps us figure out what we should want, how to rank our values, what's ultimately important.
So it gives you a kind of map for navigating life's big questions.
Exactly. It provides the deep culture, those fundamental categories, assumptions we use to make sense of everything. Think about Buddhism, for instance, the doctrine of Anatman, or no self. That fundamentally challenges the typical Western idea of a solid, separate self or ego. That leads to a profoundly different way of understanding yourself, reality, even suffering. It provides a whole different lens.
Wow, yeah. A totally different operating system for reality, almost.
You could put it that way. And then there's the capacity related to social control and legitimacy. Religion can exert pretty significant influence over behavior, over social norms. Sometimes religious ideas directly influence laws, societal rules about what's acceptable or not, and those laws affect everyone, believer or not.
Right, you see that historically all the time.
Definitely. And religious leaders or institutions can also intervene directly in politics, economics, even military matters. They can wield enormous influence because of their institutional clout or their perceived moral authority.
Can you use some examples there?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Think of Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent movement in India, deeply rooted in religious principles, or Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement in the U.S. More recently, figures like Jerry Falwell or Pat Robertson mobilizing the Christian right politically, or Pope John Paul II's role in challenging communism in Poland. Even someone like the Dalai Lama, his activism has global political weight derived from his religious status.
That social control aspect is really powerful. But it also raises a tough question, doesn't it? How do we, as sociologists, analyze the extreme cases when that control seems to become coercive or harmful?
That's a really critical sociological question, and it's something researchers study carefully. One way is looking at the distinction some scholars make between authoritarian cults and more ethical groups. Authoritarian groups might use what's sometimes called the bite model, controlling behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. They often try to isolate people, instill fear about questioning or leaving.
Okay.
Ethical groups, on the other hand, ideally emphasize things like informed consent, allowing questions, respecting a person's freedom to disagree or leave. Social science also looks squarely at what some call the dark side of religion cases, where it's unfortunately linked to exploitation, oppression, manipulation. The goal is to understand these dynamics using empirical research, not just make judgments.
And all the very certainty that religion can provide, that strong sense of knowing the truth, could sometimes make it hard for people to question authority, right? Or even their own assumptions.
That's definitely part of the dynamic sociologists examine. That certainty can be a source of great strength and comfort, but it can also, in some contexts, make critical questioning more difficult.
Okay, this is fascinating. So we've got a definition focused on practice and superhuman powers, and we see how this generates identity, meaning, and social control. But how does this all actually show up in people's day-to-day lives, both personally and then on that bigger societal stage?
Right. It plays out intensely in both spheres. Let's take the private sphere first, individual motivations. Beyond the big institutional purposes, individuals often turn to religious practice to cope with what Christian Smith calls those uncomfortable existential spaces.
Existential spaces.
Yeah, the deep questions, the limitations that come with being human that we just can't solve on our own. Things like suffering, death, the search for meaning. Religion offers a way to seek help from those superhuman powers for problems that feel too big for us.
So it's a coping mechanism in a way.
It can certainly function that way, and some research suggests religion actually comes quite naturally to us humans, given certain aspects of our brain wiring, our psychology, how we think. Think about something like prayer. People pray for very practical things, don't they? Help with sickness, sorting out personal problems, hoping for a better future. But they also pray for more spiritual things, inner peace, maybe some insight, just feeling supported. It's not always about huge cosmic questions. It's often about getting through the week.
Makes sense.
And here's an interesting sociological point: the placebo effect. The simple expectation that a religious practice will have a positive outcome can actually trigger real physiological and psychological changes. This can, in turn, reinforce the belief that the superhuman power intervened.
So the belief itself can create a tangible effect.
It can. And even when prayers seem to go, well, unanswered, in the way someone hoped, there's often an interpretive process. Religious people might reinterpret the outcome. Maybe it wasn't what they asked for, but it was a substitute or superior alternative provided by the superhuman power. You hear phrases like, God works in mysterious ways, or God's ways are not our ways.
Ah, right. It's a flexible framework for understanding outcomes.
It's a very resilient interpretive framework, yeah.
That's so relatable, actually. Even outside of religion, maybe you wish desperately for one thing, it doesn't happen, but something else comes along that turns out to be good in a different way. You find a way to make sense of it.
Exactly. It speaks to a common human way of processing unexpected events and finding meaning in them.
Okay, so that's the personal side. What about the public sphere? How does religion operate as a major social institution out in the world?
Well, first, we see an incredible diversity. Religious traditions are almost never static. They're constantly changing, transforming. Take Wicca, for example. It's a relatively recent religion, and it shows this dynamism. It tends to be decentralized, kind of eclectic, very adaptable.
Okay.
Or look within a long-established tradition, like Judaism. You have Orthodox, Reform, conservative branches, all representing different ways of engaging with tradition and modernity. They illustrate that internal diversity.
So religions themselves evolve and contain different streams.
Absolutely. Even huge historical shifts, like the Protestant Reformation in Christianity, involved a major renegotiation of the faith's relationship with the secular world, leading to different structures, different emphases.
And what about religion's role in politics and public life today? It feels like it's very present.
It definitely is. Sociologists talk about a global resurgence or deprivatization of religion in the public sphere, especially noticeable since the Cold War ended. It's not just staying in the private realm.
Why is that happening, do we think?
There are likely many factors. It's often linked to responses to big social changes, upheaval, economic shifts, maybe disillusionment with purely secular ways of organizing society, or strong feelings about national identity. We see examples all over. Think about Hindu nationalism in India, with groups like the BJP pushing for a state more defined by Hindu identity. That has huge political consequences. And you see historical flashpoints like the conflict over the Ayodhya mosque site.
Right.
Or in Israel, you have Jewish fundamentalist groups like Gush Eminim making religious arguments against returning certain territories. And of course, various Islamist movements aiming to establish societies based on their interpretation of Sharia law. These are all examples of religion acting powerfully in the public political sphere.
It's interesting because we often hear politicians reference their personal faith, but what you're describing is different. It's religion operating as a system, an institution, influencing large-scale political and social outcomes.
Precisely. It's about the institutional power, the mobilizing capacity, the way religious ideas frame political debates and identities.
And this pushes back against that older idea, right? Secularization theory.
Right.
The prediction that as societies modernized, religion would just kind of fade away into private life.
Exactly. Secularization theory was influential, predicting that modernization would inevitably lead to religion declining and becoming purely private. But the global reality over the last few decades has really challenged that simple picture. Religion's social and political importance continues in many, many parts of the world. The relationship between modernity and religion turns out to be much more complicated, much more dynamic than that earlier theory suggested. It's a really active area of sociological research.
Wow. Okay, so we've really covered some ground here. We've looked at how sociologists try to define religion, focusing on practice and superhuman powers. We've explored its social toolkit, building identity, making meaning, exerting control. And we've seen how it operates both in deeply personal ways and as this major force in public life. It really drives home that religion is so much more than just individual belief. It's this living, breathing social force that shapes, well, almost everything from how you see yourself to global politics. It's like finding out a personal hobby could actually build bridges or sometimes fences across entire societies.
That's a good way to put it. And really, no citizen today can afford to be, well, uninformed about religion. Understanding it sociologically, its causal powers, how it creates meaning, how it influences social control, its diverse and changing forms, it gives you crucial tools for making sense of our incredibly complex world. It helps us analyze how religious claims can inspire such intense commitment and action, an intensity you rarely see elsewhere. And that action can lead to incredible charity and compassion, or unfortunately, sometimes to deep conflict.
So, a final thought maybe for everyone listening. What stands out to you about how religion shapes the world around us? Even if you aren't religious yourself, how do you see its influence? Just consider how something so intimate and personal can simultaneously be such a massive public force and what that tells us about society itself.